Theme song for the Gear Podcast. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Troy Nababan.
My name is Leon Todd. It is a pleasure to be back. Thank you to everybody who has been supporting the Gear Podcast over the entirety of the podcast, people who tune in on their preferred podcast app or people who stream the show on YouTube. We really, really appreciate the support. We've been having a great time doing it, and thank you for enabling us to do what we like to do. Yep. How's your week been, Troy?
Oh, yeah, not too bad, mate. I'm a little bit sick at the moment again. Just a cold this time. Not anything too dastardly, but yeah.
Just enough to make you feel a bit yuck.
Needless to say, it's runny nose, and just general misery in Troyland. What about you, mate? What's been happening?
Oh, I can't complain, mate. Just did a little interview and Vogue-style fashion shoot for the local paper.
Yeah, you did.
Which should be interesting.
Great.
And other than that, did very little over the weekend because the weather was so nice. I just kind of, I sat outside in the sun and feels like that's where that went. So got a couple of gigs this weekend and yeah, just been there's a few, hopefully by the time this episode comes out, the things that I shan't be talking about will actually be released. But yeah, there's some cool gear coming out. So.
Teasing. Yeah, what gigs you got this weekend?
At the Hen on Friday with Ryan, and then friend of the podcast, the one and only Nick Delena, doing the Camfield with him.
Oh, that's right, yeah. Oh,
and
do you want to come to the Dockers on Saturday night?
Oh, could do, mate.
Like, if you
is that gonna? Because are you doing that gig while the other one's?
I think your gig finishes at 5, and I think I'm on at like
something
5:30.
Like that.
So if
that's pretty awesome.
That reminds me, I need to actually message, but I'm going to get tickets for the family to come by. So if you want to just walk over the road, mate, if I can get a spare one for you, you're welcome to come.
I'll do that. I'll watch you do your thing. Play on the roof of Optus Stadium.
Mate, I'll be there, just kicking ass, hopefully getting the boys over the line.
Because that's the thing that you do, Troy. You get the boys over the line.
I do my best, mate. Just play my role, go out there. I got recognised at the pool today when my daughter was having my daughter was having a swimming lesson. And my partner was in the pool with her, and I just wandered over to say, "Oh, hey, you going, sweetie?" And apparently, one of the other mums went up to my partner and said, "Oh, is that the guy from the Dockers?" And she said, "Yeah."
And she went, "No, it's the guy from the Gear Podcast."
Yeah. Although I told you this, Leon, because of the Dockers guitar thing, and we've talked about this in the past. So anyone that's listened to this podcast knows that I do that. But I think I'm going to be available on Cameo very soon, mate. So you can.
That's pretty exciting.
Anyone can pay $20 ish, maybe $25, to get me to say happy birthday or
can you do it in the same way you do the Gear Podcast theme song?
Happy birthday, Jaden.
Yeah, there you go.
That sort of thing.
Or could you sing birthday message from the Troy?
From the Troy. No, I think it's I've got to record the little intro video because that's part of it. You have to say I guess who you are and what you do, sort of thing. I had the confirmation email come in at about 11 p.m. on Friday night, and I was really pumped because I was thinking, yes, this is my ticket. This is my residual income for the rest of my life because everyone's going to want me to give them a shout out. But then the weekend sort of passed by. I didn't record the video, and I just forgot about it a little bit. So. Maybe it's something to do today. I'm actually wearing a Freo shirt-ish, if you can see that in the camera.
Hey, there you go. A true Dockers fan. Don't hold it against him.
It's actually not a true Fremantle Dockers t-shirt. It's the t-shirt. It's the merch of Taylor King, a local Perth wrestler who I played to the ring in a match about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, which was one of the highlights of my life, to have a wireless guitar. And as the music starts, and I'm just playing his theme song, and man, bloody beautiful time.
I think the only thing that could be better would be if you played Rick Boogs into the ring.
Oh, Rick Boogs can play himself into the ring. That's the problem.
But you could harmonize with him. Racer X, Rick Boogs, Troy from the Gear Podcast, now, Docker Rocker.
We may have mentioned him before, but if you're not familiar, Rick Boogs, he's a WWE superstar. He's a fitness. What do you call it? A fitness or a lifestyle? What is that thing he does?
Oh, he's just an energy, isn't he?
Yeah.
Eric Bugenhagen. And look, if you want to see somebody like lift the most ridiculous weights and then just like absolutely riff out some Cannibal Corpse or Judas Priest.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's amazing.
It's like everything that we like wrapped up in one YouTube video, but not strictly a guitar channel. It's just very funny. But you know, I hope he's okay. Like Leon and I have talked about this. He's doing like a massive weight gain exercise at the moment, and he looks real out of breath. So, you know, some of these guys are dropping like flies, man. These bodybuilder types. So, yeah, I hope he kind of takes care of himself.
It's almost like what we think looks healthy isn't healthy.
Yeah, it's almost like that. Hey,
and as musicians, we know all about being unhealthy.
Oh, mate. Well, you know, I've said, like, over COVID, I thought everyone was going to get fat, so I just kept eating and eating and eating, making mac and cheese and steaks and stuff, and then turns out not everyone did that. So I ended up being the ultra unhealthy version of myself for the last couple of years. It sucked.
But you do cook a mean steak.
Oh, mate, steak I cooked a week and a half ago, just unbelievable. Let's talk about a little bit of gear. Let me just first say, Uncle Leon, you might notice. I meant to call you Unky Leon today. I forgot.
Unky Lee.
Yeah. Unky Herb. You'll notice the back corner of the rack, the pink Mesa Boogie dual rectifier is gone.
So what's going on there, mate? What has happened? Why?
It's a sad day.
Where's it going?
Well, let me just say it's out now. It's been out for a couple of weeks by the time this goes up. But we had a chat to James Lugo, now friend of the show, and I have watched a few of his videos on his channel recently because he's got some great videos where it's just he's sitting in the studio, he's playing through the amp, twisting some knobs, putting a pedal on and off. What does this sound like? What does that sound like? Doing some sound examples, making some notes. It's good. It's a good way of demoing amps like that.
It's real.
Yeah.
You know, it's real. That's what I can say about it.
Yeah, but I loved his rectifier sound. I thought that's a sort of recto tone that I like, but I don't often get that tone. Sometimes it's too fizzy, sometimes it's too boomy, but he had it really dialed in, so I thought, maybe I'll fire it up today and try and steal some settings and have a bit of a play around. So I fired the amp up, turned him on, and channel 2 and channel 3, just nothing coming out, not a cracker.
No.
So channel 1 was okay, and because look, just to bring it back to some other guests, Jason Headfirst, he, after having a chat to him, I spent a couple of nights just obsessing about tube amp circuits and reading schematics and all this sort of stuff. So I don't know anything, but I know maybe enough to be dangerous. So I thought, I'm not going to open the amp up really and have a look at it, but we'll just see if we can work a couple of things out. So as it turns out, tube V3 in the recto was a bit busted up. So I did swap. I took the socket things off the tubes, and that one wasn't blowing. So I kind of looked it up, and as it turns out, V3 is the the boost circuit in channel 2 and 3 of the recto. So that kind of makes sense, right? If your channel 2 and 3 aren't working, channel 1's completely fine. There's probably something a bit janky going on. So took that tube out, put a different tube in there just to test it. That didn't help. The amp still didn't work on channel 2 and 3. I put the original tube back in V3 from the recto, and then that proceeded to actually explode, which is quite funny.
Whoa.
So actually,
did you see the magic smoke?
I didn't see the magic smoke, but do I still have it? I thought I might have actually put the tube in the bin. And sorry for leaky nose. I just used tissue. But it was actually a proper glass breaking. It was quite funny. So that's in for a birthday at the moment. I paid $500 for that amp. It's it's given you $500 worth of value and then some. Hey? Yeah, it absolutely has. I've used it on quite a few sessions, and it's a sound, like it's a useful, important sound that we all know and love. And so to get a service, I don't really want to retube the whole thing because probably at this point it's not worth it to me to unless they're all cooked and like they really need to be changed. I'll kind of let it run a bit longer. But that's just the problem, man. You know what it's like. You got lots and lots of valve amps. They need services, but when you got lots and lots of stuff, you don't use that. It's like, I'm looking, Leon, right behind you. How many guitars can I see? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like 8 guitars, 9 guitars. And that's a quarter of your collection there. You're not changing the strings on every one of those guitars every year. You just change them on the ones you use. You'll probably
exactly. It's an on-demand service.
Exactly. So as I say, with the tube amps, I got lots of other options at the moment. So we'll just wait for that one to come back, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the problem is.
If anybody else listening to this has had a similar dilemma, similar problem with their amps, they're more than welcome to let us know in the comment section and let us know which of your amps needs a birthday, or which one did you put off having a birthday that when you got it back, you're like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. Why didn't I do this sooner?
Hey, do people talk like that in other places? Do people say, oh, it needs a service, therefore it needs a birthday? Or is that an Australian thing?
I think that's pretty Aussie. I kind of associate it with you. Like I say that now because I heard you say it. That's one of the many magical things about how language works, right?
Yeah. I heard that when I was at uni.
Right.
And it was in reference to this is just another really nerdy thing, but probably appropriate. We used to have an old Soundcraft mixing console at the university I went to. It was a Soundcraft 6000, which, was a great desk, actually. Great desk to learn signal flow and gain structure and all those wonderful things. But the faders were always really scratchy. So you could obviously replace the faders, but that's expensive. You don't really spray contact cleaner in them to clean them out. But I believe what they went off to some treatment where it got just shocked with vibrations or something like that to loosen up whatever was on there. And yeah, it was a term. I think that's how they service those faders, which was, probably still not cheap, but cheaper than replacing the whole thing and less dangerous than just spraying with contact cleaner or whatnot. So anyway, that was the first time I heard the expression that the console needs a bit of a birthday.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, Troy, shall we talk about something that's very dear to both of our hearts, namely some rack gear today, and how, rack gear was kind of crucial to both of our journeys, and how, part of the reason we became buddies and part of the reason we do this.
And we'll talk about real rack gear, Uncle Leon. We're not talking about Axe FX3. Like, no, I'm kidding. Not fuck Axe FX3. But let's talk about the old stuff. The nerd
the
stuff.
OGs of the rack game.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, the new stuff is amazing, but we'll keep it pre-2000.
I feel like the new stuff is amazing. It just happens to come in a rack format. You know, it's not part of that. Making studio gear in a particular format that works in a studio that musicians ended up wanting to take out on the road. So, that whole history, I guess, and, links in with guys like Bradshaw and Sir and a bunch of that stuff where you have these guitar players playing on these records where they wanted to be able to get the same sounds that they had in the studio out on the road, but it wasn't like it was now where you can just, you want the sound of a UA, you want the sound of a Lexicon 224, well, you just go and get a UA Golden. There you go, spend a few $100, pop it on your pedal board, and you've got that sound. Back then, if you wanted that sound, there was only one thing that did it.
Yep. So you gigged with a rack for a while in the 2000s, which sounds crazy now.
Which sounds a long, long time ago, doesn't it?
Yeah, and again, we're talking like, because you had a JMP1.
I did, yeah. I still have two of them, which is crazy.
Which actually, Leon, brings me to my point I said before we recorded. There is a JMP1 for sale locally for $250 today. And I almost bought it, but I just don't need one of those units at the moment. It's
another thing.
It's another thing that will never get used. But those things,
that's a great price on one now.
Man, even 15 years ago when I was obsessed with rack stuff, you couldn't find a JMP1 for less than maybe $400. So that's
they were a bit more premium. They weren't like tri-axis level sort of prices, but they definitely sold more than an 80A MP1, which I think is the avatar for guitar rack gear now. When most people think of it, when someone says 80s guitar rack gear, the 80A MP1 is the thing that everybody thinks of. And, we spoke to Michael Nielsen last week, and the MP1 thing came up, and they're too expensive now. I don't think they're worth the prices they go for.
I think,
and I'm to blame, aren't I?
Yeah, you legitimately shoulder some of that blame, Leon, for jacking the prices. The JHS of rack guitar gear, Leon Todorovic. Can I say your full surname? Leon Todd.
People should know that. It's like, once I heard that Alex Lifeson's real name was Alex Zivanovic and he
there you go.
had Yugoslavian parents, I was like, cool, I'm Leon Todd. Done.
That's funny.
Having two Ds in the stage name and public persona and one D in the email, it's a necessary filter. Put it that way.
Yeah, I like it. But yeah, the 80A MP1. You've told a few times the story of your dad having that when you were growing up, right? So, and he used to rock out with it.
I'll retell that story. He recounts, it coming out and seeing it, and basically it being like, hey, you have, you have a great, like, super clean with chorus, you have a modded Marshall sound in there, and you have like a Fender sound all in one box, and it stores presets, you MIDI it up, and it's all in a single rack space. So you just get this thing. I think he had a Digitech DSP 128 and then a Rocktron IntelliFX. Mm-hmm. You just do these, and then you've got all the sounds. You have the 88 MC1, which I've still got. So he bought one new from Pro Audio, which is over in Canberra. He mail ordered it. But yeah, said it was basically those things came out and like you had to have one. Everyone who was gigging in Perth had one. And, everyone I speak to who played guitar in bands back in the late 80s, early 90s, will always be like, yeah, the 88 MP1, I remember those things. So
well, I think
it was kind of it was definitely a proto-modeler, wasn't it? Because, hey, here's disparate things that people have separate units for. Put them all in one box.
Yep.
Add chorus, go.
I remember, I got one in 2006, and I've said this before, that and my Marshall cabinet I got on eBay for a very, very good price. I was interested in it because of the Paul Gilbert videos that I was watching, the Intense Rock one, Intense Rock 1, in which he had two MP1s in a rack. And I thought, well, if that's what Paul Gilbert's using, I need to have that and a Rocktron Hush, and I think a MIDI Bird 2 he had as well.
Yeah, that's right.
That was clearly, and a Furman power conditioner, I think, and maybe not. I actually can't remember, a BBE Sonic Maximizer. But we can talk about the units in a minute. I remember, I just thought of this then. In 2004, I have a really distinct memory of being at a rehearsal with my very first band. So I was about 16, and I had a Marshall AVT 100 combo.
Yeah.
Which had 3 channels on it. So your clean channel and then 2 dirty channels. And I think I would have had maybe a distortion pedal as well. But I remember like playing and thinking like, this song, your first band, every song sounds different. We had one song that was a pop punk song, one that was like a thrash metal song, one that was like an indie rock song. It's just, 16-year-olds playing. But thinking like, all right, well, this song's going to have this sound, this song's going to have that sound. But being really confused as to how I would go from that sound to that sound, because I could press the button and change the channels on the amp, but then the pedal board that I had, which had maybe 3 pedals on it, then I have to change those pedals as well. But then the levels between everything is all really different. And I remember thinking, man, like this is weird. This is not right. Like, how do
people do it?
Yeah, how do people do it? And it coincided, like in 2006 when I got the 80A and I start to think about it a little bit more. It's like, well, okay, cool. You get your 80A MP1 and you program every sound you want in there, and then you just press a button and you go from this sound to that sound to that. You've got everything taken care of. Like, it just makes so much sense to me. And I think now, when I'm still not like a pedal guy at gigs. In the studio, it's different, but at gigs, like doing a lot of tap dancing to turn stuff on and off, it really confuses me. I think you're kind of the same, right? You just like
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, and when I do go for different sounds, I like to go from like, my clean sound and everything turns on to my dirty sound and everything turns on to my lead sound. Like one switch. I just can't really deal with anything more than that.
Because you're there to do the gig,
Yep.
I remember doing a gig a couple of years ago now. It was a wax gig, but I took the FM3, but I took the FC12 so I could have all my effects.
Yep.
And I feel like I spent the first half of the gig just like turning stuff on for fun. And I was like, hey, man, this gig's like, it's a good gig. It's fun. The crowd's into it. Why don't you just
play the guitar?
Like unplug the big controller that you're spending half of the gig staring at and just do what you normally do, which is use 3 or 4 sounds. And kind of doing that. It was because like, I can have chorus for this bit, but phaser for the next bit. No one cares.
Yeah. Do you know what I realized, Leon? I realized this a few weeks ago because, these guys that have these like really big pedal boards, like I'm talking locally, guys that have pedal boards and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of different sounds. You know what they do that we don't do? They rehearse. like actually do rehearsals with their bands, like maybe every week.
And they care.
Yeah. Whereas for the most part, we just sort of both show up and play the song and then forget about it till the next time we have to play the song. And I do wonder, I think we both suffer from the thing of like, you know what, it's fine, it's good, like we did the job. There's elements always to get better at things, but I feel like getting a specific chorus sound for one part of one song is probably not the part that I want to focus on the most, as much as like playing the song in time.
I like playing it tightly, you know. Even, you know, the once in a blue moon when we actually rehearse, it's mostly just like working out, how does that part go again?
Yep.
Why did we stop playing it like that? Why haven't we ever played this song live? Rather than, I will say, like, you know, we put the new single out, and that was, I had to practice playing the song and turning sounds on.
Right.
Well, and there's like, you know, I have to turn the rotary speaker sound on for the verse and then switch back. And there's just a few little things, but it's still the same.
The same
kind of,
sort of. Yeah.
It's the same set of sounds, you know. It's, I can appreciate where if you're playing stuff, you know, if you were doing a theater gig or something where you need very specific sounds, and I can get that, you know, having the big board. Or when we spoke to James, you know, how it was like you got the Strymon trifecta on there.
Yep.
It's because what everybody has, you know, and it's like expected that you have those things because you're in a studio environment. Hey, put on patch 10 from the Mobius. That's what we need. So I like that aspect of it. But yeah, there's definitely, and I feel like everyone goes through it, you know. If I just have more space on my board, then I can do more things and the gig will be better, where that law of diminishing returns, the diminishing returns start happening really fast.
Yep.
Past the point of like clean, dirty, wobble, echo.
Yeah.
Anything more is a bit like, well, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. But anyway, getting back to the ADA. So I got my first one in 2006. I have, I've got two MP1s, an MP2, an MP1 Classic.
Yeah.
And then two of the power amps, and the micro cab. Technically I have another micro cab and another 8A MP1 in a rack that isn't mine, but it's sort of being stored here at the moment. So I've got a lot of ADA stuff. From about 2006 till probably about 2011 or something, I was really trying to exclusively use that ADA MP1. Like, that's pretty much the only amp I had. I wasn't gigging at that time as well. It was a play in the bedroom situation.
But it's a way to go like, hey, I'm gonna make the decision to use a particular piece of gear.
Yep.
And like, that's going to be my sound.
Yeah.
You know, the same way you'd go, hey, Mark II C+, that's my sound. Or old non-master volume Marshalls, that's my sound. It's you know, Fender Hot Rod Deluxe with some pedals, that's my sound. It's like a necessary part of developing as a player, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I really liked it. I think there was a sound with the ADA MP1, and at the time, what I was focused on was playing lead guitar and playing guitar as fast as possible. And there was something about the like articulation of that amp that I didn't really get it with other amps that I tried or other rack gear. And it's funny because, I mean, at that time, I didn't have a lot of other things to try out. Like, now you and I collectively have so much gear, but we also know everybody that has everything that we could ever want to try. So
yeah, there's no foreign tastes and smells in our universe now. You know, it's
so but
accessible.
Absolutely. But yeah, what did you sort of we'll just talk about that unit for a minute. What did you gravitate towards? When we started playing together, you weren't like using that. I remember, if anything, using JMP1 if it was going to be a rack, or you would use your TSL when we were doing like jamming and stuff. But
it's a good question, and I actually have to think about where the memory part of it. I think it was obviously growing up with, you know, one of your parents who plays music, plays guitar, and my dad, when he stopped gigging, so in the early 90s, I think sold most of that stuff to my uncle, who's a bass player. So when he saw that I was pretty serious about guitar, you know, I remember him digging out this old tape and being like, oh, you got to check this guy out. This is, you know, I got this Paul Gilbert video, and that changed my life. Intense Rock 1. And, he does same thing. He does, here's my rack, this ADA, and it does this. And I remember watching it with my dad and him going, I used to have one of those. I sold it to your uncle. And I was like, it sounds so good, and he would say, yeah, you can do, you could do this, and this, and all this kind of stuff. He's like, I just wasn't using it, so I got rid of it. And, but your uncle probably still has it. So, let's hit him up and, find out. And then it was sort of like, it ended up, I think he bought it back. And then it was sort of like, cool, got the ADA back, try it out. And that was crazy because I was like, well, this is clearly superior. Just the way it works is better than any of the amps I've got because you have 100 different sounds. That's better. You can dial in the minutiae of what you want. So similar thing where it's like you can hook it up with MIDI, and then I taught myself the basics of how to program these things and MIDI. And that was like, like you, I like learning things. So that was so fun. It's like, well, it's not pedals, it's different. This stuff was terminally uncool as well.
Yep.
We're talking about like nu metal is still the most popular sort of thing people are into. It was like before your Darkness, Jet sort of thing made like retro rock music cool again. So it was terminally uncool. I like that it was different. No one knew what it was who was our age. And from then, I'm pretty sure it was sort of this like, oh, cool. Well, what other rack gear is there? So I learned about the Pt.1. And again, there was like someone sold one pretty cheap. And a PV Rockmaster, I think Junior Light Music had one for like $100 or $150. So that's kind of like all around the same time.
I reckon you had a lot of that stuff when we met because we met in like December 2006, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So there was a lot, and I remember we bonded over the ADA MP1. But again, like you weren't really playing it that much at that time. But
yeah, I think I liked I always remember someone saying, maybe someone who worked at a music shop, they were like, "Oh, the ADA is good, but like the JMP1 sounds the most like an actual Marshall head."
Right.
That was, and I was like, "Oh, cool. Well, that's a good thing." Yeah, I did like the ADA, but for whatever reason, I can't even remember why. Probably just because it said Marshall, and I was like, well, Marshalls are the best.
Yep.
Had the JMP1, and then I remember getting can't remember if I had that when we started playing together, the G major, but I definitely did my year 12 graduation ceremony. I wrote a song, and me and a bunch of the other music kids performed it, and it was basically just like, it sounded like Evanescence. Because we had these two girls singing and one played piano. So we wrote this like song for...
It was 2005. It was the style at the time.
Man, it was literally the style at the time. You put an onion on your belt, you listen to Evanescence. And we played it at the graduation ceremony. They had it at this... they rented out, this hall from one of the churches. It had this amazing sound system in it. And I remember doing that gig. I had my JMP1 and an IntelliFX. And like this, I just went hog wild programming. It was like, the verse had all this chorus and reverb, clean guitar, and then the guitar solo had this ping pong delay. It was basically what I still do now. But I remember just being blown away by how good that sounded.
Yep.
And yeah. And then I also remember one day I was running it into the effects return of a Marshall head, just plugging straight into the Marshall and being like, that actually kind of sounds better. Like, what's wrong with me? So I did go back and forth with it. I think it was just like you'd have a couple of sounds and it was easier than having a pedal board. And like, I also bought a bunch of like those Layla switching systems always was going to build a board. But, this is like pre-pedal train, pre-rock board, all that kind of stuff where it was like, if you wanted something, you kind of had to do it yourself. And
I remember
it was easier.
I remember when you bought those Leo splitter things because, the one that I still don't understand. I don't mean like you buying it. I mean, generally, there's the one that's like 3 guitars into one. So I can understand splitting a single signal into multiple things. But to me, what is still confusing is like, just like not unplugging your guitar cable and just plugging it into the guitar you want to use. Instead, I can understand I've seen other like rig rundown ones, like touring ones, when if you've got like a bunch of different wireless units, then it might be kind of useful to switch it there. But I was speaking to someone else recently about that too, where it was like locally they were talking about not wanting to swap cables depending on what instrument they're going to use. I guess if it's a really quick change. But
I think for a multi-instrumentalist, it makes sense. Like, say you were playing electric guitar, pedal steel, and like banjo or uke for a country gig, then that's perfect because you just pick the next thing up.
That's fair enough, yeah.
But for what I was doing, it was stupid. When I sold those things, there's a fun little story. Someone bought one over East and I posted it, but I posted them the wrong one. Like there's the 3 at 1 and the 1 at 3.
Yep.
And I got this message like, hey, you sent me the wrong one. So yeah, I paid for them to send it back and then I sent them the right one. So I remember feeling like a big dumb idiot. But I digress. So yeah, I had a lot of that stuff around the time we started playing. And then I guess after, that band, you left and then, kind of eventually kind of became Ragdoll. The early days of Ragdoll, I was gigging with the Pt.1, a G major, and I'd got a BBE Sonic Maximizer because why wouldn't you? It's the sickest.
I remember when you got the Sonic Maximizer because I'm pretty sure it got delivered to my house. No, you know what it was? I bought it for you and you reimbursed me because you didn't have...
I didn't have PayPal.
Yeah, or eBay or something like that. You went... Well, it was one of the two.
Bro, me at the time, I probably didn't even have a bank account.
Mate, you didn't have a phone. It was like, I remember, and this is 2006, man, 2007, I'd call you, but I have to call your home phone because you just didn't have a phone. And then when we caught up after not talking for like a year or two, you finally got a phone. I'm like, oh, shit. And actually, what was also really funny is in like 2010, when you guys came into record the first bunch of Ragdoll stuff, you had a phone, and then in between recording sessions, you'd got an iPhone as well.
Yes, that's right.
And then like 2 years after that, you were just one of the most chronically online people, and never off Facebook and all this sort of stuff.
Mr. Social Media used to call me.
Yeah, and then it just stopped, and I was like, yeah, Leon's come back to life a little bit. It was it's quite not surprising. It's quite funny how that happened. But anyway, I got the Sonic Maximizer because I think I must have ordered that for you, and it was the red one, which was I don't remember what model that is. It's it starts with an 8 maybe.
482
was that one? Yeah, but I was like, being a chronic ADA depot user.
Yes,
I had to have a BBE because that's what all of the people recommended. And then I was a bit more conservative with Shell. I just didn't ever want to spend money on anything. And you were just like, yeah, fuck it. I'm going to buy this this BBE. And I finally, it got sent to my house, and you're like, you can open it if you want. I'm like, yes. So I remember plugging it in and having a little bit of a go on it. And it was definitely cool. One thing I found with the ADA when I was using it is, and I think this would be different now. It's just like, you look back with the ears of a 19-year-old. I found like there wasn't enough like high end in it for me. I was always cranking the presence control like so high.
Yes, and that was kind of the trick, right? That gets you that Paul Gilbert Mr. Big sound he had is like crank the presence control.
Well, I was always trying to find a unit that would do that, like give me that high end sheen thing. That clearly wasn't in the ADA, so I thought, well, maybe it's the BBE, of which I do have one. I don't know if I've ever actually turned it on. I bought it for like $80 secondhand.
Yeah.
But I actually got, at the end of 2007, my rack going through like uni and when we were jamming, it got bigger and bigger as I started to make more money and like understand how to use eBay. So I just started buying shit because I got a Rocktron Hush, the Super C, I think it was called. I had that for a little while as a noise gate because it had to be a rack mount one. It couldn't be a Boss pedal. That was just Velcro.
Why would you have a pedal?
No,
rack, better.
Has to be rack. Quadraverb, Elisa's Quadraverb. And I got the ADA power amp as well, the B200 power amp. But yeah, I found a TC Electronics 1140 rack mount parametric EQ.
The parametric EQ, yeah, right.
And I got that it was in terrible condition. I found it in Adelaide.
Remember that.
Yeah, I got it the first time I went to Adelaide to visit my partner's family, end of 2007. But it was like, I thought, this is it. I finally got it. The answer to all my problems. I can finally get that high-end sheen. And it was always so noisy. And it just didn't really ever work for me. Like, the noise was a problem in and of itself. And the biggest thing I remember from that time, though, was like, why am I the only person doing this? Do you know what I mean?
What's wrong with people? They're missing out on the magic.
Yeah, it's funny to look back now because like you see so many. I don't mean to pop my own tires up by talking like this. I wasn't like on top of the trend or anything, but going back to what I thought when I was like 16 of like, I should be able to hit one button and then everything changes. Like, wouldn't that be so much better? And you see that now with these pedal boards, like with your gig rig stuff.
Yeah, big time. And the Boss the ES8, the RJMs, it's all about making it function like a rack.
Yeah, let alone your fractals and all that too.
Yep.
But I just remember thinking like, fuck, it's not that big. Like a rack is probably about as the same size, all things considered, as a head, but you get so much more functionality in it. And I was also obsessed with getting, because the ADA has phantom power on the MIDI. So
one cable to front of stage, bro.
Exactly. And
yep.
I remember in my rack, once I had it all built, it was a Gator 6-unit rack with wheels on it. So you could just wheel it around, so it wasn't that heavy or that difficult to transport. But one thing I did was I went to the local computer store, and you could get lights that would go inside your computer cases, because I used to build PCs and stuff.
There you go.
Then. So I wired that on the inside of the rack just so the rack would light up, and I thought it was just the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And I still put lights in anything I possibly. I mean, you can see the LED strip in this place now. But yeah, the one cable to front, like the easy setup, all this sort of stuff, it makes so much sense. If I think about it now, the sound of it just wasn't quite what I wanted.
Yeah.
It was cool.
This is the elephant in the room, right? Like, we also kind of didn't really know what we were doing with...
Yeah. I mean, like, I think it's funny now. Like, I know I can get a better tone out of all these units because my ears have developed a little bit more. And that's from, like, using the preamp side of it or using the effects or whatever. So I reckon I could, dial... Well, let's not say anything in, but I could make anything usable. But at the same time, it's like, you want a dirty sound, just buy a fucking like DSL. It actually sounds pretty good. Buy a rectifier.
Well, Troy, this leads us into why I stopped using this stuff to gig with. The first couple of years of Ragdoll stuff, again, Pt.1, G major, BBE, and I just run it into, there was a backline head, use that. Or when we do like country gigs, I'd take that Laney combo that's still kicking around here somewhere, because it's the power amp and the speaker. I never had a dedicated power amp. Always wanted one, but could never like justify the cost. Just use the effects return of a head. And we did a gig at, I think at Amplifier Bar, and you came up and you were like, yeah, it was cool, man. You should just use a head, because it's like your guitar sounds fine, but just use an amp. And I remember being like, okay, Troy, I will do that. And then the next gig I did, I think I just like, literally, it was Tuner Wah Soldano, and that was
which is funny to think. I just had a Soldano.
I just had a Soldano. I wasn't using, But I did that, and I remember having a great gig. I think we played at Amps, and it was actually the first gig we did as a 3-piece. Like, did the 3-piece thing for a few months. Got someone else in the band. That didn't work out, so went back to being a 3-piece. And that was all like, no, we are a 3-piece band forever and always now. And I used that rig, and it was just awesome. Like, everything about it was awesome. I was like, cool, never going back. For a while anyway. But yeah, and I just remember it was so much easier to dial in, because you just, you plug a few things in, you have your pedals on the floor for your boost and your wah or whatever I was using. And, you let someone mic it and do all the hard stuff with it. I didn't need ping pong delays and chorus and all those kind of things. It was nice to strip it down and just really work on playing.
I think what you guys were doing back in like 2011-ish, it was a bit more 80s sounding, and you could get away with the JMP1 and the G major's not an 80s unit, but you know what I mean? It lends itself to that sound a bit more, whereas when you're playing slightly more detuned stuff and heavier stuff, like the actual punch at a gig, and the effect of the sound filling the room was a bit more useful.
Big time.
And it's funny now that you're using completely digital stuff for all the gigs. Like, you go back and forth a little bit, but at the same time, the PAs these days are a little bit different than what they were in like most of the venues. Like, they're a bit fuller, and what you can travel with now is like, man, like you and I gigged with the old EV plastic boxes and little
Yeah.
Yamaha powered mixer for a long time, which was okay to listen to vocals. But if you try to put a whole band through that thing, it wasn't really up to the standard. But you can get a cheap PA and make all this work really well and really seamlessly, and it's not really a problem. So it's a case of like all of the gear sort of evolves at once, I suppose.
Yeah. It's, you can't have the digital solutions can be great, but if there's not the like sound reinforcement aspect of it, then it's not going to work. And most venues here now, they expect people to be using modelers, and they have in-ear sends hardwired into their stages and things like that. So it's significantly easier. But yeah, that was kind of it for me until, obviously until I got your old Axe Ultra to tour with, and that was convenient.
Yep.
And here we are. But it was when, for me, so this was like, it was basically like ADA, JMP1, a few weird I was really into preamps.
Yeah, me too.
That's what I liked. Not so much the effects side of stuff. I didn't really understand reverb or delay or the difference between any of this kind of stuff. It was just like, preamps are cool because no one else likes them and it's my thing. And then doing YouTube stuff, I think early on I did like a preamp shootout video, and the video got a lot of hits. I was like, hang on. There's people out there who like this stuff. What's wrong with them? And it was probably like...
Shout out to you, Michael Toren.
Exactly, Michael Toren. Exactly. The photos that he sent me last week of his rig are just...
Oh, my God.
Incredible. We got to get him on. But I digress. The preamp thing, and it took me a long time to come around to the actual rack effects and why people get obsessed with the specific units that they do, right?
Yep. I remember that preamp shootout that you did, because that was all hooked up through that Rocktron MIDI switcher as well, wasn't it?
Correct, yeah.
The Rocktron channel switcher, which I remember you had, like, someone commented on that about the way it was hooked in, because didn't something like one of those pre's didn't quite sound right or something?
Yeah, and this is actually kind of where the actual realizing there were people who still like rack stuff who are experts on it and the rig building thing, and like someone was like, oh, hey, that switcher that you're using, it's messing with the impedance. So one of the units that sounded crap, it's like, have a listen to the difference between it patched in with the unit and then plugging straight in. And when I plugged straight in, it was totally different. So I was like, oh. And then noise issues and grounding, and that. I remember there was a long thread on Huge Racks Inc., which was all these survivors went with their stuff. It was a full rig build on there. Where someone was just like, hey, I'm building the ultimate Bradshaw rig myself. And it was like, you got to have an Eventide H3000, you got to have a PCM 70, and the way they loaded the heads down and the different, it was like, I just remember reading this thread and being like, this is beautiful. And I don't know anything about these units. And that's kind of where the obsession started for me. And then, seeing the Michael Nielsen videos, and there's a guy, I forget which, pretty sure he's in Scandinavia, Christian Larson. It's like the tri-stereo chorus thing and all those kind of sounds. There's just a video online if you look up the tri-stereo chorus. It's like that, a timeline for delay, Eventide detune. It is the 80s clean sound. So yeah, someone sent me a Rockman as well, which was really cool in the early days of the channel to sort of get access to that. And it was like rediscovering all this kind of stuff. Almost to me, it was like almost understanding the context a bit better of why this stuff was made and the records it was actually used on. And it's coming at it from that perspective of like, rather than this is weird stuff that just happened to be made. Honestly, man, I think for us as teenagers, it's kind of like that was a great unknown. It felt exotic and like, it felt like forgotten knowledge. Yeah. Because of where the internet was at the time and being in Perth. But coming back at it, the way I've done it and kind of the way we've done it now is like, it's not forgotten knowledge. Everyone, this stuff's really well documented now. So it's like, why is a Lexicon reverb great? You can go on to Gearspace and like read Michael Kahn's from Lexicon, break down the history of their reverbs. It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I feel like we're just probably like one full generation removed from this stuff, like to understand fundamentally the whys. Yeah. It's, but we're there. I mean, we're getting there. Like maybe, don't do this, but JHS has this like hour and a half video about the rat. It's like, someone needs to do. Michael Torin, like he's got everything. Surely he knows everything. Someone needs to put together the official, unofficial history. Actually, you were talking about that the other day about a coffee table book. Hey,
someone should do a coffee table book, and it should be Michael Torin.
Yeah,
because Michael has all the stuff. But yeah,
or alternatively, just a video like the history of it. There's a lot of. I always find it really funny when you get these new units in. Like I didn't know anything about those Sony units. Like never heard of them. And then it's just like, yeah, check it out. Here's 3 things that sound awesome.
I have to give my buddy Brian Hook a very, very, very big shout out. Someone who watched my channel, who hit me up for some lessons, and this is at the start of the pandemic, and you know, I was just a person I was teaching online, and the more we got chatting about classic rack gear, they were just like, you know, there's they had an incredible synth collection, and sort of saying, yeah, you know, I've owned all these classic rack units, and I'd love to hear you do your thing through them. Can I send you some stuff? So yeah, that was like an incredible opportunity to have somebody basically like, you know, funding the obsession. So that's one reason why I had so much stuff on there, where it's like, I literally had someone who was willing to just be like on eBay or Reverb and see some weird thing and be like, I never got to try that. I'll send it to Leon and then listen to the half-hour demos. So that was, yeah, that was incredible. And Brian's like, I still keep in touch with him. Awesome dude. Like really, the angle on it was, it's like, hey, this is kind of like a public service where there are these units. Not all of them work. They're hard to find. Some of them are rare. Putting up actual in-depth demos with them and trying to make them sound as good as possible and have an accurate representation of what they can and can't do.
Yeah. It's funny because I was watching a Kyle Bull video just before we jumped on to do this, and with his collection of amps, it's kind of like you become a librarian of all this gear. It's or a museum almost of like that's kind of the that's where you are with some of the rack gear and what your channel is. It's just that's where you find the knowledge. It's really
like, say, take someone like Kyle though, which I really like, because Kyle's obviously coming at it from like a kind of hardcore punk thrash background, which is not our background at all.
Yep.
So to hear him play through like a 5150. A 5150 is like, that became the amp for certain genres that I've no experience playing, but like hearing what he does with it and why you do it, and it's like understanding the context of these things for those styles is, again, it is to me, that's an important, you know, I don't want to oversell it, but it's like you're capturing part of the culture that these things were used in. You know, they're not, you know, I listen to a lot of podcasts about history and archaeology, and you know, a lot of the stuff they talk about is like, oh yeah, this ancient community of people, they're known by their distinctive pottery shards. You know, so it's on one level, it's like, oh cool, well then you can document them, but then trying to understand them as human beings. To me, it's like this gear is, when we were younger, it's like an 80 AMP1 was like it's like a vase that made it through a million different hands in 1,000 years, and it's like, oh, people used to make honey mead in this, so let's try and come up with their own recipe for it. Whereas now it's sort of like, oh hey, you know, it's used on, if you listen to Porno Graffiti, like Michael Wagner did this and this, Nuno did this, and you sort of capture why this gear was used in the context it was used in.
Yep.
Not that one is worse than the other, because when we kind of came to it, we were trying to do a very specific thing. And whether we were successful or not, I don't know. But there is that thing, you know, if I demo like a TC 2290 or an Eventide, there's certain things people want to hear.
Yep.
But then there's certain things that I want to do with those units that weren't part of the initial context. Like, you know, so when I demo reverb pedals, I always do the dirty sound first now, because you do the clean sound and it's reverb and it sounds pretty. It's like, well, if I'm going to use like a PCM 70 and I want to use the rich plate on it because that's Lynch Mob and Queensryche, I want filth out of it. That's not what they were developed for. You know, that like all those things were attempts, if we're talking about reverbs, for example, there were attempts to like recreate real spaces. And it's almost like the initial attempts were limited by the technology and the knowledge, and they actually weren't that accurate, but then they had a very specific sound and they were used on classic records. So the initial intention for making them and the initial use aren't necessarily the same thing. So like the stuff a PCM96 has, if you wanted to like use it on a classical recording to place instruments in space, way better, but it doesn't sound like a 480L or a 224.
Yep. Yeah, did you play around with the PCM96 much? I don't remember. We used it on...
No, I never have.
Yeah.
And I've heard that about the Bricasti as well, where it's like, yeah, it's not what you expect.
Yeah, I haven't used the Bricasti because they're expensive and there's probably a couple around. The PCM96, we had one at the studio at Crank for a couple of years, and I reckon that was used on the first Ragdoll stuff.
Yeah, interesting.
But yeah, it definitely was on the first Luke album, but on vocals and stuff. But it was cool. It was the Lexicon plugins are the same effectively.
Yeah,
like, they probably sound a little bit different because of the your old hardware versus plugin sort of thing, but. Yeah, it wasn't like I don't know if history will look back on it as being a classic unit in the same way that you do with the PCM70 or the 480 or something like that. And not to say it's good or bad, it's just like it's just a really good sounding reverb. There's a lot of other really good sounding reverbs that exist in plugin format nowadays. So I don't know with that one in particular if you need the unit, but I'm sure people doing way different stuff than what I am that would say differently. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Or like the Sony R7, which is was a high-end audio unit. And, I've got one here and play distorted electric guitar through it, and it's cool. But, I'm sure if you were recording a string quartet and you needed like a kind of room simulation, that's probably where that's coming from.
Yeah.
And then also, there's this thing with like, and it's the same with pedals and amps as well, where it's like, character versus precision. And if you look at something like so here was the other thing, right? I got an SPX90 a couple of years ago from Japan. And my understanding is SPX90s are either thrashed out or in mint condition. There's no in between. But I also remember early days with my dad saying, he's like, oh, the other unit, he was like, I never had one, but lots of people use it, was the SPX90. Mm-hmm. That was so I'd always wanted one for that reason. But when I got it, I did some reading about it, and I was like, oh, this is kind of the first widely available, affordable multi-effects unit, because it does more than just, if you go back to the, I guess the history of the development of this stuff is like not all reverbs are created equal. Not all like digital delays are created equal, where most digital delays now are an AD converter, some DSP stuff, and then another AD converter. Whereas like an early like Roland digital delay, you're using the digital part about it is the digital delay line, which was replacing the Bucket Brigade stuff, which was replacing tape.
Right. Yeah.
And everything else around it is analog. So you have a lot of filtering and companding and stuff, and that imparts an imperfect character to it, and people start to like the character about it. Same thing with like, why one reason Lexicon PCM 42s are so expensive is not because of the delay, it's because of the preamp.
Yeah.
And what was it, like Andy Wallace and
there's
a bunch of stuff
there's
like
a
that.
trick of it's a limiter in it, I think, because it has, I think must be on the input, like some limiter on the input. But yeah, the Andy Wallace guitar trick is that you just drive it and put a short delay time on. So if you want to make your guitar sound wider, you pan like your clean, unaffected guitar one side, and then the Lexicon with the distorted limited signal and the delay to the other side. It makes it sound big and wide. And I've never tried it like with a real one because I don't have one. There's lots around, but man, they got so expensive so quickly.
They're definitely in that conversation of like, I mean, they're expensive for a reason, and I get that they're kind of rare, but they were also, some of this stuff like especially the Lexicon stuff, I always just associated with reverb. I didn't know that about the PCM 42, but like something I got turned on to a little while ago is like all the stuff, like Brian Eno. I never understood Brian Eno, right?
Yep.
And the using studio gear as part of the musical process and that early electronic stuff is like, when you change the delay, like the ×2 button on an old digital delay, how it would you could use it as a pitch shifter, and
Right.
like there's all these kind of fun tricks which if you're like someone who wants to play metal or rock music, you're never going to use. You just want an echo that sounds good.
Yep.
But that side of it, I think I have a lot more appreciation for, or like, you know, using a reverb and looping it into a pitch shifter to create shimmer, which, you know, is like part of that came from the fact that, like, you know, if you're using a DX7 or like FM synthesis, a lot of the time the stock sounds are like really boring and they don't have a lot of character. So you get the character by adding time-based effects to it.
Yep.
Versus, I think in like guitar land, distorted guitar has a lot of character. So
yeah, that's really funny because it's taken me a long time to really understand that, and I certainly don't think I use it effectively enough now. But I never really understood chorus at all, right?
Yep.
And I've come around to it a bit. I do use it now, but if you turn the chorus effect off certain synths, like take a Juno or something like that, it just sounds so lame. But you just as you say, coming from guitar and coming from like, you know, rock guitar, 70s, 80s rock guitar, and I mean, I was about to say like, oh, look at Eddie Van Halen, like he used time-based stuff, so let's not be too fucking stupid about it. But at the end of the day, it's just kind of like, oh yeah, it's pretty simple. It always feels simple. It shouldn't be like, yes, we're talking about racks and stuff, but it's how much gain are you using? What's your EQ settings?
Yeah.
Like that's the thing that matters, not the like you're crafting the sound by using a phaser or something.
Yeah. And I think for guitar, like we're always looking for character. I think that's been the common, if I could extract why maybe I was after these particular things. You get these old rack preamps and they have a different character to a DSL or a 5150. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that can be something that you're after, or a particular rack delay, like, you know, the 2290. There's not like what it does is so cool, and it does a lot of different things. But you know, it's even like the Roland SDE and the SDE 1000, for example. You know, the common thing was like, oh, well, the DD2 has the same chip, so it's the same thing. They're not the same thing. You know, there's all this extra stuff in the rack unit that can impart character, or, you know, different workflows and things like that. So I think as guitar players, we're always looking for these, like, we like the crust and we like the imperfections. So an SPX 90 versus an XPX 2000, you know, the 2000 is going to have way better reverb algorithms and be more accurate and be more powerful. But when you put it on a guitar, the bandwidth limited nature of guitar anyway kind of means that maybe the symphonic effect on it, like, it can just make the guitar pop in a mix or live when you kick it on, and it's like part of the, again, I don't want to use the term mojo, but it's like it has a specific sound that it does.
Yep.
And if you're chasing something that isn't maybe as widely available, it can give you that.
Yeah. Two things. Firstly, I did have an SPX 2000 for a while.
Right.
Got rid of that. I sold that in 2011 to get my first Waves bundle. Funnily enough, because
there you go.
Someone as a live sound unit, it's still great, but I just wasn't using it. I think I got it pretty cheap and sold it for a bit more than what I paid for it, and bought a Waves bundle, and that has been significantly more useful over the course of my career. Exactly,
right?
But
and it's crazy now with plugins. Like when you buy a plugin, you can use multiple instances of that plugin on different tracks, versus a rack unit. You got one. Mean, some multi-effects have multi-IO, but it's basically like you got your one sound.
Yeah. I had a Sony I think it was called the DPS V55M.
Yep.
So I had that in the late 2000s. I also sold that around 2011 because I wasn't really using it. But that was a multi-input, so it had 4 inputs. You could run, I believe, 4 mono effects or 2 stereo effects, or
that sounds
maybe
about right.
one like super duper algorithm or something like that. But every time if you're using it, more channels of it, as in like if using 4 mono effects versus the stereo ones, like it does have a slightly different, like worse algorithm, or whatever. I think to save on DSP. But yeah, it was okay, but ultimately, because back then the idea was that plug-in reverb was still terrible, and if you wanted to have really good reverb, you still need to have some sort of hardware unit, and that's why I ended up with that, and also why I got the Yamaha, which until you mentioned it, I hadn't thought about that unit for years and years.
That's crazy, man.
But all that stuff's caught up big time.
Yeah, and it's kind of converged. Like, it used to be that Yamaha reverb sounded different to Eventide reverb, sounded different to Lexicon reverbs, because they had to invent how to do it from scratch. There was, with the H90 that Eventide just put out, they have the SP2016 algorithm in there. And I did a video with it, and I got into like a conversation with, I think, Anthony Agnello from Eventide, who, like, invented the original SP2016 and sort of said, hey, I had to do all this from scratch. And going in, it was like, well, I just want this to sound good. So it has a, like, where you are in the room parameter, which I think is really interesting, which something like a Lexicon doesn't.
Right.
And again, it was just because they were independently having to figure out how to do artificial reverberation and not make it sound like absolute garbage. Because I've actually gone and, Sean Costello, Valhalla, has all these great resources if you want to learn about the history of digital reverb. And, having a maths background, I've read a lot of the papers on, like, Schroeder diffusers and stuff like that. And you can make these things and they sound terrible.
Yeah.
And then you hear, like, the early Lexicon stuff or Eventide stuff, and it sounds beautiful. Like, they did it. And then you hear, like, the reverb in, like, a Rev 7 or an SPX90. It's good, but in a different way. It is a bit more metallic and not as diffuse. But,
is that just
you put it on a kick drum?
Is the filtering that sorts it out? I can imagine.
I think it's
a big part of it.
I imagine it's filtering and it's algorithm design and how many delay lines you can have, and, like, there's a lot of there was a lot of hurdles to jump over. But if you listen to them in isolation, like, the Lexicon stuff sounds really pretty, but then, like, you put the Yamaha early reflections on guitar and it just makes it sound thick, and it's pretty cool. It's not perfect, but again, it's got character. Whereas I think by the 90s, it's like all these tricks and, how to make things sound smooth. It's like everything kind of converged, whether it was for better or worse. Like, it's sort of the vanilla effect with it, maybe.
It's funny, I was going to say before, when I was studying, we had a few SPX 90s just around the uni that would dragged out for various purposes, for shows or whatever, and maybe one in the studio. But the general consensus was, like, don't use it because it's the worst reverb of all time, and that was the official line from the head lecturer. And it was, I think, partly the metallic-y sound of it, but I think it was just I think it was a little bit noisy as well. So they just hated it, like, the people there. And the same as the quadriverb was, like, there was a very not famous, but there was a experience I had with this lecturer, Trevor Gaines. So shout out to you. Not that he's ever gonna listen to any podcast ever, but he and I had a few battles when we were studying, and I try and catch up with him whenever possible now, because he's been really good to me. But he was talking about how noisy the quadriverb was, and then when I put one in my guitar rack, when I bought one, I did this thing where when the quadriverb was off, the guitar noise was louder, and when I turned it on, the guitar noise went quieter. And I was like, oh my god, it's amazing, like, how does it do this? And he came in and I was like, Trevor, I got to show you this thing. This quadriverb's amazing. It actually, like, cuts the noise. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I turned it on and off and I showed him. He said, oh yeah, cool, play a chord. I was like, okay, play a chord, and when the thing is off, the, like, volume goes up.
Everything's louder.
And it's just like, oh, okay, when the unit is on, clearly I haven't, like, got the gain structure quite right. So
that's so funny, man. Yeah.
I also
loud is more good after all.
Yeah, I also had a massive argument one time with him where I got, like, the Fletcher-Munson curve and inverse square law mixed up, and he let me go on about it for, like, an hour and a half until he finally corrected me at the end. Like, yeah, you're not talking about the right thing, but okay.
Yeah, you got it the wrong way around, bro. Yep. Don't worry. These smart people who do audio are actually correct.
Yeah.
I was going to say, sometimes you got to go down that and just be like, having someone you can butt heads with until you realize you're the idiot is kind of nice.
Yeah, I had a few lecturers like that when I was studying. There's one that I only had for 1 year. Derek Kreckler was his name, and because I was like 18 and thought I knew everything and only liked heavy metal, and he was a guy that loved Brian Eno, so we didn't get along very well and had a few battles which I'm sure I thought I won, and I absolutely was the asshole. And it's actually really funny. I feel like I don't really have those similar discussions with students, like antagonistic discussions. Actually, if he listens to this, Jay, one of my students, he always comes in with these questions that completely derail whatever I'm talking about, and we go on a 45-minute tangent about something, which is always fascinating, but always derails a very simple conversation about something unrelated. I was going to say, just last thing on the SPX 90, like, because of that experience at uni, I always thought they were so terrible, and I never wanted to have one anywhere near my rack. And I didn't realize that until well later, like probably even when we were talking about, the symphonic patch and what that is and what that's been used on. And it's like, okay, life makes sense all of a sudden.
Yeah. When you know it's on what it's on, you're like,
yeah.
So Zakk Wylde didn't just plug in like a Boss chorus pedal to the front of a JCM 800. That's why it never sounds right when I try to do that.
Yep.
It's amazing. Like it is cool that there's these things that have these. They were used on things that are so foundational.
Yeah.
I mean, for the way my ears developed, and probably for you as well, where it's like you play that piece of gear and you're instantly connected to what it is. It's the same as like a Strat Tube Screamer Fender amp for me is like, Stevie Ray Vaughan, cool. That's just an energy, that you get out of that rig. So, and which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
And then some stuff like the Sony DPS M7. No one talks about it. There's a patch in there called Spiral Modulation, which is like one of my favorite delays ever. It's not on anything. That's awesome. It's like this blank slate. You can just play things through it, and it doesn't remind you of anything.
Yep.
And it's cool. And there's no plugin that does it. It'll be easy to recreate with a plugin. Recreate it in the Axe Effects, and it's pretty cool. But it's just so, so many ideas that you can see in a parallel universe. They became the big thing.
Yep.
Rather than the thing that is the big thing. It's not just like, well, the 2290 was just destined to be the greatest delay. It's like, it's kind of right place, right time.
Yeah. Actually, the other thing I was going to say quickly about the SPX stuff is I'm pretty sure all those algorithms like your symphonic patch was in a lot of Yamaha effects, and the early reflection ones and the drum verbs, I think, whatever it's called.
They've kind of done it through the line.
Yeah, but it's also the same effects that are in like all the digital consoles as well.
Interesting.
So we had the O1V, which is just like a little, I think it was a 12 or 16 channel digital console early. Was it Pro something in the 90s, and then the O1V, and then there was like a 96K version of it. We had all of those going through uni because they were early affordable digital consoles. So like pre your Behringer XR16s and whatnot. This was like, still faders and everything like that, but fairly robust. But so they were, kind of easy to use.
Interesting.
So, we used those a lot when I was studying, and all those effects were pretty much in there, and they become fairly ubiquitous in terms of the use in live sound situations. Like if you walk into a venue, it's always going to be one of those units there. And
there's going to be in 20 years a retro thing with people where they're using these like Behringer desks and the like the all-in-one Yamaha mix things to make music, you know, because it's stuff no one wants right now, and we can't envision why anyone would want to go back to that time, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, I reckon there's been a conversation I've had with a student in the last 12 months that's been, I bought this piece of gear, whatever it is, like a pedal or something, and I've laughed in their face like, man, I was around when that was a thing and it was terrible then. Like, what do you think? Like the equivalent of like a Marshall Mode 4, let's say.
Yeah.
Where it's like,
or a Marshall MG.
Yeah. So it's funny. So who knows what's going to be popular. What I think is funny, we're talking to get back to the preamp stuff, and your a positive/negative influence on the ADA community and the fact that people have them now. It's like
hey, ADA Depot also is like one of the nicest places on the internet.
awesome.
So shout out to everybody there. I've learnt so much from that, and in particular, Marshall JMP, the man, the myth, the legend.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should try and have a chat with him too, because
That'd be awesome.
he's the ADA man. But I think it's really great. It's like when we spoke to Charles, he's got.
Yeah.
I still can't believe he has an ADA in his rack that he uses, because so many, like for me, I've got ADAs over there, but they're mostly for show. I intend to use them, but they just don't get the love because they do a couple of things really well, but I've got other amps that I just find a bit more useful to me,
Exactly. You've got your Stiletto now, which is the underrated beast.
I certainly do. I
feel like there's a few of those things that have come into our lives where it's like my old Recto, your Stiletto, your Marshall. It's sort of like, oh no, these are the cool, wacky old pieces that work.
Just way louder. What I did try, let me take a tangent, related but slight tangent. So the Two Notes Torpedo, the Two Notes wall of sound plugin, sorry, not the Torpedo. And you've got that plugin, don't you?
Yes.
Yep.
I like literally the power amp simulation in it is a nice thing to have.
That's the thing, right? So if anyone happens to have the wall of sound plugin and just use it for like speaker IRs, of which it does that really well, something that I suggest if you have a like a rack preamp, like an ADA or something like that, is get on that power amp simulation and just crank it all the way up. Because
it's good. It's actually good.
Yeah, there's a thing about that which makes it just a rack preamp sound like an actual guitar amp all of a sudden. It's really surprising. And you can obviously change the different types of power tubes and stuff in there. So I was using the MP1 with that for a little bit. It was actually during the pandemic when I was hooking stuff up and I had a bit of a nerd out with it. And I bought the Two Notes Cab M because that also has power amp simulation in it as well.
Yeah, okay.
And I thought, well, that actually is going to make more sense because I can take these like rack preamps that I have, run them into the Cab M, put the power amp simulation, put the IR on, and then just record it like it would be a normal guitar amp. Because I will say, I've had pretty inconsistent results with the wall of sound plugin. In terms of actual operation of it. It's a weird. Okay. I've tried to work it out, and I just don't have a solution for it. But on this computer, if I open up the wall of sound plugin and tweak some stuff, and then close the plugin and open the plugin up again, the sounds default to the default patch, and it's really weird and very difficult to use it because you tweak something, you spend a bunch of time going through IRs, and it's completely unusable. So again, using the Cab M, because it's just a small box and it tracks the sound down, like no harm, no foul, it's all done. So I did try that for a little bit, and I shot it out on a few projects, the ADA MP1 using the Cab M, and they just didn't beat the amp, unfortunately, so it wasn't the winner. But
it was not the one.
Not the one. Maybe I'll probably investigate it again at some point. But as I said, anyone that's got that plugin, power amp simulation, it's pretty important.
Yeah, I would say that definitely better than preamp into IR. Well, I feel like maybe we should do part 2 of this and get the Tauren on here. So I'm gonna get in touch with him this week, and we'll make it happen and then get some real deep preamp and effects lore. And
I will finish up with one thing, just as I want to talk about this with him or anybody that wants to comment with some more knowledge, because when we just quickly spoke about the rack preamps, I can't work this out, but maybe I'm just really stupid. Your rack preamps running through that Rocktron switcher, right? I don't understand how impedance was an issue in that situation, considering how the unit works, because you were just running one unit at a time, weren't you?
I was, yeah. There was something funky going on, though. I don't know if it was like there was a buffer that I was using or something like that, where it was just
so if anyone has a bit more insight, because as far as I'm aware, it should be like guitar goes into the front, it goes through the loop you want and out again, unless it's the impedance created from like all the little patch cables connected together. But
maybe that was it.
But even that,
or maybe it's just not a very well isolated switcher or something.
Maybe. So, I mean, from my understanding, like the guitar signal doesn't get routed to the piece of equipment until you actually press the on button of the piece of equipment.
But there are all those little patch cables, which is annoying. And the Switchblade doesn't have. People can go and watch my Switchblade video that I did recently. It's amazing. Yep. Shout out to Charles at Bad Robot for getting me on that. And to you, Troy, for finding that one that I actually bought for a decent price. Yeah, that's like if I had that 15 years ago, that would have been a lot easier managing a rack. But also... right place, right time with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. So if we can talk to Michael Toran, we'll talk about how you can actually switch all this stuff and use all this stuff and not just have it look cool in a rack, because he's got it. He's got stuff functioning, and
it's incredible.
That's impressive.
It's so incredible. And with that, Troy, I think we will wrap this episode up. If anybody has experiences with classic rack gear or not classic rack gear, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from what you used. This was sort of our... a little bit of nostalgia, a little bit of like what we're doing currently, a little bit of just chewing the fat about it. It's such a fascinating topic, and still, I think, an underappreciated part of the vintage guitar gear realm.
Yep, absolutely. So good on you, mate. Hey,
good on you, mate.
Great job.
Thumbs up.
And
you're gonna start feeling better, mate.
I hope so. And
I hope so too.
Let's see. So Fremantle's got. Sydney this weekend. West Coast has Carlton. Ooh. How you feeling, mate? You feeling pretty good about West Coast Carlton?
I mean, if they lose by less than 100 points, that's a win at the moment, right?
Harry Mackay's out, so that's a big plus.
Yeah, they played better without him last week.
Yeah. Hey, maybe Charlie Kerner won't kick 8 goals. That'd be nice.
Maybe he'll kick 12.
And, as a final parting thing, everybody, just go watch some AFL if you don't live in Australia.
Go and get around the boys.
And specifically get around the West Australian. Yeah, get into the West Australian teams, West Coast Eagles, Fremantle Dockers. Everyone else can go to hell. We don't care about them. But
those days, ever since we spoke to Jason at Headfirst, who's a St Kilda guy, St Kilda not going great.
Away. So you're welcome.
You're brilliant, Troy.
Hey, good on you, mate.